I really believe that one of the biggest issues with overeating, binge eating, all the things we're talking about has to do with we are eating to try to numb. We're eating to try to change an emotion that we're feeling. We don't want to feel whatever it is that we're feeling. If that is one of the biggest reasons that we eat, we get triggered to binge, all these things, and we want to stop that long term, then learning the skill of feeling our feelings, even the horrible, awful feelings, it's like the urges go away.
Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jenn, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. Hey friend, welcome back to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm Jenn Trepic, your host and health coach, here with you every week for wellness without the weirdness. So I want to start with a quick announcement. So the pre-sale has ended. Tickets are now available to everyone for Salad with a Side of Fries live in New York City. So link for tickets will be in the episode notes. I can't wait to see so many of you there. This is like the perfect reason to plan a weekend in New York. The swag bag, by the way, is worth the cost of the flight and then some. I can't wait to see you live and in person. So it's going to be Salad with a Side of Fries live on July 25th. That's a Thursday. Can't wait to see you. But for today's conversation, so we often talk about creating healthful habits and lifestyle of health rather than dieting or doing these like short spurts of time periodically, right? And one of the things that I love most is hearing how other experts talk about some of these topics that we talk about often, because sometimes we just need to hear it in different words or at a different time. So I couldn't be more excited to introduce you to this week's featured guest. She's been working in private practice for over 20 years as a licensed mental health therapist, life coach, and health coach. She's also an FMS certified exercise professional who along the way worked for some years as part-time as a personal trainer, owned a CrossFit gym, and created an online weight loss and maintenance program. She's a recovered binge eater, restrictor, yo-yo dieter, and suffered with anxiety for years. This led her to creating and hosting her podcast, Weight Loss and Wellness for Real, and also creating online courses, all with the purpose to help others find food and body freedom, as well as purpose and joy in life. You see why we get along, right? Her mission is to bring whole person health. That means physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health to individuals so they can live their absolute best lives. She's 50 years old, mother of one, who loves to travel, is an avid rock climber and mountain biker, and has taken on multiple solo multi-day bike packing challenges over the past few years. Amazing. I can't wait to hear about it. Please help me welcome Heather Heynen.
Thank you, Jenn. That was such a nice introduction. I really appreciate it. And I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. We get to continue our conversation. So filling everybody in, I was on Heather's podcast, Weight Loss and Wellness for Real, that aired in February of 2024. We talked all about willpower and that wild, challenging interaction between intensity and consistency.
That's right.
So
it was a great one.
Oh, thank you. So when you guys finish listening to this, head back over and listen to that one. And, you know, Heather, we heard a bit of your story, but I want to start with that.
Sure.
Really quick, though, we have to tell our members what they're getting. So members, your recipe this week is for grilled teriyaki cauliflower steaks. So this is a great example of how to make veggies the star, right? How do we treat the vegetables as much of a star as we often treat the protein? So it's like 10 minutes of prep, beyond delicious. And then also, thanks to Heather, you're getting 10% off one of her online courses. So one option is called Mastering Mindful Eating, Overcome Binge Eating, Overeating, and Emotional Eating for Good. Or when you're ready to stop the weight loss medication, a guide to natural weight maintenance and mastery. This is beyond awesome. Heather, give us like the 10-second version of why we want this discount.
Yes. Well, I have put my heart and soul into these courses. And I've got some good feedback on them. But it is really just a structured way. If you're not working with a coach or something like that, maybe a little bit more financially viable for some people. It's just a real structured way to get to that space where you can be in freedom with food and your body.
Love it. So if you want this recipe or 10% off one of Heather's online courses, you have to be sure that you're a member. So you go to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries. For $10 a month, you get weekly recipes, a monthly article or tool, extra discounts from me and our partners and our guests like today, plus access to quarterly live Q&A session with me. It's a total deal, really a steal, because when you take advantage of the full offerings, you're going to save far more than that $10 cost. It's seriously a no-brainer way to show yourself that your health is a priority. Plus, being a member supports this podcast and this community, so we can continue to do this with you every week. So remember, all you have to do is go to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries, or even easier, just click the link in the episode notes, because then you don't have to remember a whole thing. Once you're there, you click the little I agree, and then enter your email and payment info, click subscribe, and you're all set. You'll get this week's recipe for the grilled teriyaki cauliflower steaks and 10% off one of Heather's online courses, either Mastering Mindful Eating or When You're Ready to Stop the Weight Loss Medication. Okay, awesome. Heather, spotlight on you. We know you're recovered binge eater, restrictor, Yodo dieter, had the anxiety.
Yeah.
How did all of these things play together and then translate into your work?
Yeah. So that started a while ago. I've been doing this for quite a long time. So it was back in my 20s. Probably what a lot of your listeners would understand this as well. It's sort of that decade when many of us get going with the dieting. We don't like our bodies, so we're trying to get the weight off and we're trying the latest, greatest diet. And I think most of us probably lose some weight on that. We maybe even get to the body that we want to get to, but which is common. You end up gaining it all back and putting on more. And that was me. And so I was constantly in this flux of gaining the weight, getting it off. And then I was fairly athletic as well. And I was into some sports where the weight kind of mattered. And so it really created this very binge restriction cycle. So mine started with restriction, which often happens. And then, you trigger all these things within the body that lead to a lot of binging behavior. And for anyone who's been through that, it is just so exhausting. It's exhausting. It steals your life. And it really was stealing my life. And so over the years, it was a process. I really did some work to get out of that pattern, out of that habit of behavior, if you will. And really, when I finally was able to break free of that is when I really had this heart to help people specifically who also deal with food issues, if you will, things like overeating, but it doesn't even need to be binging specifically, but overeating, emotional eating, this place where we're really hooked emotionally with our food.
Yeah. And as a mental health therapist, just out of curiosity, right?
Yeah.
Like, how prevalent do you see this?
Yeah, a lot, specifically the overeating patterns, the binge eating patterns. So I see, there's all these diagnoses that we can give from the DSM-5, so we have things like bulimia and we have things like anorexia. But the truth is, and statistically, this is proved true as well, the biggest disordered eating pattern is binge eating disorder or overeating, emotional eating, that sort of thing. So in my practice, I do specialize in that. So personally, I see it all
You're
the
going to
time.
see it.
That is on my clients.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. But if we look at statistics, that is definitely the biggest type of disordered eating that we have going on. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, one of the things that you and I both work with our clients on is this long-lasting behavior
Correct.
change. Like anybody, I'm going to say this, I'm curious if you agree, but I think anybody can do anything for a finite period of time.
I totally agree. Yes.
Right? So then it becomes a function of, how do we create the things that we can do for an infinite period of time?
That is the truth. That sustainability, I think that's the big piece that's missing from the diet industry over the past, 40, 50 years. And I think that's starting to change, where there are more and more people, therapists, coaches, that sort of thing, focused on, okay, not just the weight loss, not just the health, but how do we sustain the actual behaviors, the habits that we need to have in place in order to get to those goals. So yeah, I agree. It hasn't been there, but hopefully that's changing a little bit.
Yeah. And I think awareness is the first step, right? So what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people making when it comes to changing behaviors?
I think what happens, well, this was me, and I know a lot of my clients go through this, is that when we are looking to make big changes, so we'll say weight loss as the example, or even just change a behavior to help create a healthier body, I think most of us go into it thinking that if we're talking about food, like we have to start restricting big time. So the mistake in my mind is this mental thought pattern of that, well, it has to be hard and it has to be restrictive in order for this to work. And the paradox is, which is what we're talking about, with that mentality, it's like the exact opposite. You end up sabotaging, you end up putting on the weight. So it's this real interesting space mentally where we go and we kind of make that, I guess we'll call it a thought mistake, the wrong type of thinking.
Yeah. And then the other thing that came to my mind, as you were saying before, so much of what you see in your practice with the binge eating is this emotional eating. And so we're not taught how to name or process emotions.
Exactly. Yes.
So we'll get to that.
Okay. I know. I was waiting. I'm like,
but it's a piece of the mistake that I think everybody thinks that they don't have to do that part of the work.
Yeah. Right.
Or that's not what's driving.
I agree. And I think it isn't until you do start maybe digging a little deeper. Maybe you're working with someone, maybe you're journaling, these sort of self-reflection type exercises where then it becomes apparent, oh, there is some deeper stuff driving this. I don't know, Jen. I think people, I know me as a human, like I want to just believe it's going to be kind of quick and easy, and that
don't we all?
Right? I know, right? And it doesn't mean it needs to be super hard either, but it is sort of like it does take a little bit more time than I think most of us would like it to take. We just want it to be easier, of course, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that.
And by that token, I think also a really effective tool is maybe more complex or inclusive than a lot of people think it is. Right. And so part of what attracted me to the work that you do is that you pair together the thought work and the somatic practices.
Yes.
Right. So let's, as a foundation, will you explain somatic practices and why this combination is so much more effective?
Yeah, absolutely. And if we're talking like within the therapy world or the coaching world, a lot of times what happens is we get in this real cognitive behavioral type therapy, which is awesome. We actually have tons of research behind it. It's really beneficial. I do use that a lot. So that's working with the thoughts. That's learning to shift to more helpful thinking patterns in a nutshell is what that's about. And our thoughts create our feelings drive our behaviors give us our results. So you can understand why working with the thoughts and shifting to the more helpful ones is really important when we're talking about sustainable behavior change. Often the part that's left out, I would argue, is that somatic processing or somatic experiencing, we could call it. It is called somatic therapy. There are trained somatic therapists. I use it a lot within clinic. And that's where we actually are talking about processing emotions through the body. And so if you think about emotions as, I think about emotions, motion, and E in the physics world stands for energy. So we're talking about energy in motion. And so our feelings, our emotions really are energy within our bodies. And if we don't learn, and like you talked about, we are not taught these things. If we don't learn how to process emotion in so many words, it gets stuck. It gets stuck within the body and it creates a lot of, it can even lead to like physical issues with the body. It does lead to weight gain. That's another physical component, can lead to a lot of anxiety, depression. So processing emotions is really important. And that somatic, practicing the somatic experiencing, there's different techniques and skills to move, if you will, that energy through and out and beyond of the body so that we're not holding on to all that emotion and then having this buildup, if you will, that creates all these problems within our lives.
Yeah, I love it. And that's what I want to dig more into.
Sure.
Like, what are some of these somatic exercises and what does that look like? Because also, I think for a lot of people, the cognitive part either falls into one of two camps. Either it's doesn't work for me, tried it, done it, I feel like I've checked the box. It's not a thing in my head, but it's still this thing in my body.
Right.
Or I'm not interested in even going down that road.
Right.
And yet
Almost
it's
denial.
still stuck in the body. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. So, if you think about, like I was saying, that energy is sort of this, or the emotion is sort of this energy that we're trying to kind of process. We're trying to move. Another word that I like to use is digest. So if you think about, you eat a really, really big meal. So, if we're thinking about a big meal as maybe a stressor in the day, or we could even say like a big T trauma or a little T trauma, but it can just be a stressor. So we eat this big meal, and if we're not digesting it, and now we have another big meal and another big meal on top of it, there's no digestion taking place. It's the same thing with emotions kind of piling on top of each other. So some real basic ways for somatic experiencing.
Wait, really quick.
Oh, go ahead.
Can I interrupt you?
Yes, of course.
Because I imagine somebody getting stuck on this.
Yeah, go.
Examples of big T trauma versus little T trauma.
Oh, yeah, sure. So, and that's also a little controversial in the language. I still use it because it just sort of makes it semantically somewhat easier to know what we're talking about. But big T trauma would be defined as something that's maybe very traumatic to the body, or also if you witness violence to another person, that can be considered big T trauma. So we're talking violence to the body, violence to someone else that you witness, things like a car accident, those sort of things, this big T trauma experience. And then within the therapy practice, they'll use words like little T trauma, meaning more things like everyday sort of traumas. One example that I use a lot is, let's say you grew up in a home where, mom and dad were there, but there was a lot of verbal put down. So it maybe wasn't these big traumatic events to you, to your body, but you heard a lot and often that you weren't good enough, or, you got all A's, but you got one C, and no one says anything about the A's, but they're like, why'd you get that C? It's that sort of little tiny things. And the other word for that is complex trauma. So does that help?
Yes. I just I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I know.
Let's explain it.
And whenever it comes up, people are like, well, because and we've done episodes on this, but I think people are like, I don't have trauma.
Oh,
right. And it's like, well, we all sort of have these experiences that essentially in one of these episodes, we defined it essentially as trauma is what happens when we don't process the emotion. So it doesn't matter what the initiating thing is.
That's right.
It's about the other side of it.
That's
and whether
exactly
or not.
right. Yes, you're spot on. Like how you end up processing that experience. So something that, if you will, quotation, like traumatizes me, might not you, So
Right.
It isn't necessarily the experience that you're spot on that defines it. It is how we react to it. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I do want to get into the somatic exercises really quick, though. We got to highlight our partner for this episode.
Yes, go for it.
Okay. Friends, if you are a fan of Salad with a Side of Fries podcast and looking for how you can support us, we've got you covered with our awesome merchandise. So maybe this is the perfect reminder of your commitment to your health. And super exciting, not only do we still have the fan favorites like the hashtag Team Fries and hashtag Team Salad Muscle Tea, but there's also a new one that's You Can't Outrun Your Fork. There's new seasonal items. I love the trucker hat for summer. I think it's awesome. Not to mention the new workout mat is amazing. So you really owe it to yourself to check out everything that's there. Plus, like I said, you get to show off if you are hashtag Team Salad or hashtag Team Fries while you support the show and all we do for you. So also, if you are joining us for Salad with a Side of Fries Live, this is the perfect place to wear your merch. So snag something ASAP. Head over to our website, asaladwithasideoffries.com/merch. Browse the full collection. Maybe you want the new water bottle. It's this beautiful green color, perfect for sipping around the house or on the go while enjoying our latest episode. You can take a piece of the podcast with you wherever you go. And like I said, maybe these are your best anchors to remind yourself of your commitment to your health. So simply text the word FRIES, FRIES, to 844-947-4846. You'll get the link right to your phone. Check out the full Salad with a Side of Fries merch line. Your purchase supports all the work that we do here, shows your podcast pride, and maybe it sparks a conversation for you to pay it forward and inspire someone else to change their health too. So again, simply text the word FRIES, FRIES, to 844-947-4846. This is a toll-free number. Standard text and data rates may apply. Okay, Heather.
Yes.
So we have this process of behavior change. There's the thoughts, creating, feeling, right? All the things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do we start? Do we start with the physical exercise? Do we start with the thought component? What do we do?
Yeah. I really think that's up to the individual, like where you feel you want to start. It's sort of like if you want to get into the thoughts and maybe you're someone like me, you're a little bit more analytical, you're in your thoughts a lot. That might actually be a clue to start with the body. I mean, because if we're like that type A, very driven, that sort of thing, we often live up here in our head. And that often will point to we're not so good at feeling our feelings. We want to analyze, we want to think about them, but we're not actually good at processing or feeling those feelings. So it might just be a little, you take a peek at yourself, like, am I more in my head? Okay, maybe I want to start with some of my body. How do I process the feelings through my body? Yeah. And vice versa. Maybe if you're really into dance and, you have that movement going and you're very expressive, but you're not always in that logic brain. Maybe that's when you start with, okay, I probably need to work on this thinking pattern of mine. How do I get more into my head a little bit more?
This might be projection, right? Because I think I'm like you, where I'm much more in my head than in my body.
Sure. Yeah.
And we started to do this before I interrupted you before.
It's fine.
What are some of those physical things to do?
Yeah. So, and I just want to make a distinction. Like if you go to a somatic therapist, if you're in the therapy room doing somatic therapy, it's going to be, some of these things might be in the therapy room, but it'll be a little bit different if you are in practice with a somatic therapist. Somatic therapist is going to have you in the room. They're going to notice things on you. They're going to say things to you like, I noticed, when we talk about that, your shoulders went up to your ears. It seems like they're tight there. What's going on there? They notice things about your body, and it's a way to process through. But if you're working on this, you can do some of these things yourself. So this might be when you notice you're really anxious, for example, you can stand up and just shake your body. You can dance. You don't need music, but just that movement alone can help take the temperature of the anxiety down a little bit. There's other different protocols, things like the butterfly hug. It's where, you put your hands on your shoulders and you just kind of move your fingers around, that sense of almost giving yourself a hug. And some people think these things are so weird, but we actually have really good research behind it bringing our nervous system down, really decreasing our sense of stress in the moment. And then other ones that you can do would be anything to do with grounding. So literally grounding, where you bare feet out on the lawn, out on any, even cement, things like that grounding can really help process any emotion that you're experiencing. But then grounding also in the sense of emotionally grounding, where maybe you do a 5 senses technique where you, in the moment, think about, what do I see? You just name what you see. You name what you hear, you name what you taste in your mouth, you name what you can touch, and you name what you smell. So it's just going through your 5 senses. It brings you into the moment, it grounds you, and it helps move that emotion through the body. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, makes total sense. When do we want to do these things? Is it in the moment when you're like, oh, cheese sounds good? Or like,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, such a good question. And yes, would be the answer to that. Yeah. Me personally, and with my clients, I always tell them that, use these strategies in the moment. And, obviously there's a little practice there too of recognizing when we're in the moment, or maybe when we have a trigger, if we're talking food, like recognizing when I come home in the evening, that's often a trigger to go through things. So knowing it's a trigger. I'm used to feeling anxious, so I'm using that as an example, but any difficult feeling that we're wanting to change with food, it's noticing it. And then, using those techniques in the moment to kind of reduce the sensations that we're not wanting to feel in the moment. So yes, in the moment, but I also would say this is a practice that if you can do it every day, even when you're not feeling a negative emotion, just practice being in the moment, use the 5 senses technique. When you practice it, when you're not in the moment, it makes it so much easier to happen automatically when you are in the moment. So it just makes using the skills a lot easier. So it's both.
Yeah, for sure. And so I guess tie it together for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
How do these kinds of tools, like I love the idea of the senses, right?
Yeah.
How does using that translate into this long-term behavior change?
Yeah. So I really believe that one of the biggest issues with overeating, binge eating, all the things we're talking about, when it's related to emotion, has to do with we are eating to try to numb. We're eating to try to change an emotion that we're feeling. We don't want to feel whatever it is that we're feeling. So if that is one of the biggest reasons that we eat, we get triggered to binge, all these things, and we want to stop that long term, then learning the skill of feeling our feelings, even the horrible, awful feelings, just learning to feel them and experience them, which, as you pointed out, no one's ever taught to do. But if you get good and skilled at that, I mean, it's amazing. It's like the urges go away. The emotional eating starts to dissipate because you're like, oh, I know how to feel my feelings. I don't have to change them. And what happens then over time is your nervous system learns, it really relearns, like I can handle difficult emotions. I don't need other things to numb, to change. I know it'll pass. I know how to move it through my body. I know how to take the temperature down. So yeah, that's how I would say that really understanding the importance of learning to feel your feelings and how that relates to our weight is huge.
For sure. For sure. And then taking the other side of it for the person who's maybe more often in their body and maybe starts with the thought piece of that. What's an example or a couple options for that side?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can process a feeling. One of the number one ways, and I think easier ways, this is actually one I use a lot because I am in my head all the time, but is to, when you are experiencing distress, you just simply name the emotion that you're having, and that helps to process it. So if I'm feeling anxious, I say things like, oh, here's anxiety, or oh, here's some anger, and I say it that way versus I'm angry or I'm anxious. Like we're trying to create space between the feeling and ourselves. So we don't want to identify with that feeling. The second we're identified with a feeling, we're often going and we're going to grab the food to try to numb that, be done with it, whatever. And so really being able to verbalize and say, this is anger, this is anxiety, this is grief, this is sadness. And when you get really good and nuanced, and I often have my clients take home like a feelings sheet, like a list of feelings, because a lot of people have the vocabulary of like, I feel mad, I feel glad, I feel sad. That's it. I'm okay. Right. I'm okay. Yeah. And so what you really want to do, and research points to this, is get very nuanced in your vocabulary with your feeling words. And the more nuanced you are and can name that feeling, you will find, it's fantastic. The temperature of that feeling starts coming down. You can process that feeling. There's just a lot more state of peace. And when we're in that state and emotion regulation, we aren't going to food to deal with those things.
Yeah, it reminds me of, there's this book I've mentioned before, Permission to Feel.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. But there's also like Google a list of feeling words.
Yeah, you can pull it right up. And I do. I hand them out like little worksheets. Take it home. And when you're having a feeling and you don't exactly know what it is, go through the list. Because something's going to pop out at you. You're going to and there's hundreds of feeling words, hundreds, So something pops out of you and then you say that. This is, and name the feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about state versus story and that interplay. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. State and story. So I don't think it's a theory of mine, but just this is something that I think about a lot. Like our state, our nervous system state, our state of mind really can come from how we're thinking, the story we're telling ourselves. That's why learning to have this more helpful narrative, helpful stories really can help us create a state of being that's a lot more peaceful. But the other side of the coin is that if we can create a more peaceful state, then our story happens to be more helpful as well. So there's two sides of the coin there. We can work on our story, our narrative, and there's ways to do that to create a much more helpful thought process, thought pattern, thought habit. And we can also work on creating a more peaceful or healthful or wholesome state, if you will, by like how we nourish our bodies, what we're eating. Are we getting enough sleep? Are we hydrated? All those foundational things that create our state of being. And now I'm in this state. And so it's much easier for me to have more helpful thinking. I'm sure you've had this when you've been sick before, like when we're ill and it's like, all my negative thoughts when I don't feel good. But then the day I wake up and my fever's broken, I feel amazing. Oh, my thoughts are so positive. And, that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, it's so interesting because in the curriculum that I work with my clients, we start on the nutrition piece.
Yeah.
And then get into
you bet
the thoughts and the behaviors because the other stuff reveals itself.
That's
versus I often feel like when people try to start on the other side with the thoughts, it feels like we're white knuckling it and it feels impossible.
Yep, it totally can.
Yeah.
And I would just say I've definitely had that experience. And I would say there are some individuals I've worked with where they cannot get into that state first. I mean, no matter what we do, they cannot do the nutrition. They cannot do the water. I mean, that just
right.
And I'm dealing with some different clientele too, obviously.
Sure.
Like these are usually clinically depressed patients, So I would say in that realm, they are the ones where we can start doing these little baby steps with the thoughts first. And if we can get them sort of down this more, and I'll just say it, they usually don't get positive thinking, but I can like the neutral thinking at least, then they're able to start drinking the 8 glasses of water or whatever, their plan is. Yeah. Yeah. So, but I agree. If you can get into that state first, our stories, we're much more helpful in our brains.
Yeah. So it occurred to me as we were talking about this thing with our emotions and using those words and figuring it all out. And so much of that is a learned experience.
Yeah.
And many of our listeners have kids or littles in their lives. I'm so curious, what are some recommendations that you would have for how do we help cultivate not just a better vocabulary of emotions with kids, but also helping them feel the feelings?
Right. Helping them be able to learn how to, what would we call it? Like tolerate distress better?
Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, I love that question because I just think it's the way, and I can be a little dramatic. I'm very touchy-feely, but I really believe, that we can really change our culture, our world by working with kiddos and teaching them these skills. Like it would be a dream of mine to have these skills taught in every single elementary school, when they're still willing to learn all these things. And so, yes, teaching them the vocabulary for feelings is huge. Like that alone would be and is. I mean, there are some places that do that to help kiddos. And it's amazing when they can just verbalize what they're feeling. Because if they're having temper tantrums, if instead you can teach them these words and model these words and, teach them to learn how to speak, I feel, or this is, what I'm feeling, those temper tantrums dramatically decrease, so it is a great way to teach them. Beyond that, letting them as the parent, as the model in their life, as the safety source in their life, say to them, when you're feeling angry or upset or sad or whatever the thing is, you verbally being able to say to them, mom is feeling really sad right now. And, this sadness is okay to feel. And this is why I'm crying. And that's okay. And you don't need to be scared. And, the comforting words, but also just normalizing that feelings are okay. Even hard feelings are okay. So just talking to your kids about that, just having the conversations. I can think about, I have a daughter, she just graduated, so she's older now, but that has been one thing. Like this is my language, this is my job. So, it comes a little easier, but it's like being able, since she was little, to teach her how to use her words to express her feelings, which helps her process them. And then also giving her the message, but modeling as well that it's okay to feel those tough feelings and they're not going to kill you. They feel like it, but they're not gonna. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Last question, because I know I'm not about to go do a solo bike packing trip. So I have to ask you, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's safe to say that the average listener is not. What lessons have those experiences taught you? And does that show up? Like, how does that play into your work and your life?
Oh, I love this question. Thank you for asking it. Yeah. So bike packing by myself is something that I started doing about 6 years ago. And in fact, this is hilarious timing because I'm leaving in 2 mornings from now to take on my biggest one yet. So we'll see what happens. But I fell in love with it because of the struggle of it, is the truth. And when you're out there on your own or with anyone else, it's no matter what, it's hard. It's hard to be out there. You ride your bike all day long. You know, it rains, it snows, it hails, it's all the things. You can't find water, you can't find food, you know, all these things. It's the struggle. And I really, as hard as it was the first time I did it, when I got back, it was almost so addicting because you get back and it's sort of like, wow, I did that. Like it was the most confident I had ever felt. And what I found was it made everyday life so much easier. Like the problems that came up in everyday life, the stresses that came up, it was nothing because of what I had just sort of been able to do. And so it really, and I think this is with any hard kind of physical thing, you know, it teaches you that lesson of I can do hard things. And so the rest of life kind of gets a little easier, which is just this amazing blessing in life, you know, so that, and how it really has actually impacted, you know, my disordered eating as well, because I had worked through a lot of things, but when I started doing the bike packing and just really found this confidence, it really gave me this ability, and we won't get into this, but to sit through the really strong urges that I was having to binge. They're horrible. I don't know, you know, if someone out there has binge eating, they'll know it's like these horrible urges. It's like an itch you can't scratch until you eat. It's like the worst poison ivy itch you've ever had. And to sit with that, to me, felt like I was going to die. And after experiencing, you know, this physical bike packing thing, it was like, well, I did that. So I think I can do this too. And so being able to sit through those urges has been huge. So that's a little how they interrelate.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the word that's popping into my mind as you're saying the story is like hormesis, right? It's like this, right? It's this.
Yes, absolutely.
We put ourselves into this really constructive challenge.
You bet. Stressful state on purpose. Yeah, absolutely. And we grow and we learn, and it's very cliche, but it's very, very true. And it absolutely makes us stronger to be able to do whatever else it is in life that we're trying to do or get through.
Yeah. And back to this idea of, you know, the long-lasting behavior change, like it's not so glamorous sometimes.
That's
right.
true,
but it's the little things that we know we can repeatedly do.
That's right. Over time, consistency, all the things we talked about in your episode with me too. I mean, yeah, it comes right around to all that stuff, that consistency and being really patient with yourself. And, you know, we didn't talk a lot about this, but, you know, this is part of it, giving yourself a lot of compassion and grace through the process as well. Because even with the bike packing, I don't always finish those things. You know what I mean? It's like they don't always go as planned. There's been a lot of epics and a lot of like not finishing, and that's okay. That's totally okay. It's more about going back out there again.
Yeah. And so I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, you know, grace and self-compassion and some of these things are so hard for so many of us.
Yeah.
What's something that we can do to help harness that and grow like that component of this? Yeah. Thank you. That's the word.
Yeah, you bet. So there's lots of ways, but I'm just going to give one. And you know me, we've talked now, like I love very practical strategies. So I'm just going to give a very practical strategy. And this would be a journaling strategy that you use. And so it would be sitting down and in your journal, writing to yourself from a loving parent perspective. So being able to say, Heather, you know, you really have done a great job. This. You really are this sort of person, you know, and some people cannot put positive adjectives in there. And I get it. And so I ask them to start with neutral ones. You are working on this. That's a big one. Can you remind yourself in your journal, you are working on this? You know, you are trying, you are, you know, doing your best to stay consistent, whatever it is, but writing to yourself, from yourself, with the perspective of a loving parent, maybe your best friend, maybe it's your dog or cat who loves you unconditionally, but literally trying to get into that space and writing to yourself from that.
Love it.
Okay, cool.
All right. I think it's time for a rapid fire off-topic questions. You ready? Okay.
Yes.
What's the best thing you've done for your health this week? What's the naughtiest thing you've done related to your health this week? Because, it's balance, right?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, and I can answer both of these so easily. So best thing I did was I did not get a lot of sleep last night, which is unusual for me. And I still went and took a little bike ride, but not make it crazy. Like it was just like a little nice light bike ride. So I feel like that was a good choice on my part. The naughty, I had, and this is going to be food because I do love food and I do enjoy my food. And so I had a homemade, we have a beautiful bakery here, a homemade, I think it was like a raspberry bar or oatmeal bar or something like that. So I had that to eat last night for dessert, which might have been why I didn't sleep so well.
Right. Now that we're connecting the dots.
Exactly.
Right?
All of a sudden that just dawned on me.
Right.
But it was delicious and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So
Perfect.
No regrets.
If you weren't a therapist and coach, what would you do?
I wasn't a therapist and coach. What would I do? Gosh, that's a great question. I don't know if I've ever thought about it before. I've always wanted to fly like a pilot, So maybe something just totally different and off the wall, maybe a little adventurous. Yeah, maybe fly a plane.
Nice. Your favorite book on any topic other than your area of expertise?
Oh,
or you could give us a fiction book.
Oh, man, I am not. I was reading fiction forever, but I'm terrible with titles and names. And obviously, I want to say The Body Keeps the Score, but that is my area.
It's so good. I know.
That is my area. I don't know, Jen. I might have to pass on that one. Nothing's coming to mind. Sorry.
All right, I'm going to do this one. Are you a TV person?
No, I don't even have a TV.
Oh, my God. Okay, we're going to have to talk after. You're on a pedestal to me. I'm such a obsession with television.
No. Well, I watch Netflix. I've got a computer.
Okay, there you go.
All right.
So,
yeah.
All right, what's the last thing you watched on Netflix?
Monk. Do you know that show?
Okay. Yes, great show.
I watched it a long time ago, rewatched it. Yeah, it was great.
All right, if you could cure one ailment, disease, or sickness, what would it be?
Oh, it'd be cancer, for sure. Yeah.
If you were a superhero, what would be your superpower?
To fly. Totally
right.
Fly. Yeah.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
Complaining. And that goes for me. I don't like other people who complain, but I don't. It goes for me too. I find myself complaining and it annoys me.
Yeah. All right. Last one, in your opinion, what's the next frontier in wellness?
I would say, and maybe this is just because it's on my mind right now, but I would say what we started out talking about, more of a focus on teaching and educating people how to make sustainable lifestyle changes that create health and well-being. At least that's what I'm hoping for.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
From your mouth. Well,
yes.
Heather, thank you again for being here. Tell everybody how to connect with you, where to learn more about everything you do.
Yeah. Best place to go is probably just my website because you can connect to everything there. So it's Heather Heynen. Heynen is spelled Heynen, heatherheynen.com. On Instagram, I am Heynen Counseling and Coaching. It's a long one. I don't know why I picked it. It was back in the day when I didn't know what I was doing. So, but those are probably the two best places. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Facebook. Yeah.
Perfect. And we'll put links to everything in the episode notes so it's easy to find.
Sounds good.
Thank you again. Your time, your perspective, all your stories. Just appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate you having me on and also just the questions you asked were outstanding. Appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. All right, everybody. On Friday, in this week's Nutrition Nugget bonus episode, we're talking about the calcium paradox. So have you heard about it? Because it's not a new concept, but it came up recently in a conversation about eating dairy or not eating dairy. And I then realized that we didn't have a nutrition nugget on it. So we're going to talk about it now in this week's bonus episode. So be sure wherever you're listening, click the plus sign or the follow button so that your app will alert you when the bonus episode Nutrition Nugget goes live on Friday. Well, as always, everybody, I'm Jenn Trepeck, your host and health coach. Connect with me on Instagram or all social media. I'm at Jenn Trepeck, JENNTREPECK. Website is asaladwithasideofries.com. Pick your platform, send a message. I love nothing more than hearing from you, your takeaways, your ideas, your questions. This is also the easiest way to learn more about working with me as your health coach. Heather Heynen, thank you again for being here.
Thanks a lot, Jen. I so appreciate you.
Likewise. And friend, if you are not already, join our membership by going to glow.fm/saladwithasideofries to show your support for this podcast, this community, but most importantly, support your health. You'll get this week's recipe for grilled teriyaki cauliflower steaks and 10% off one of Heather's online courses, either Mastering Mindful Eating or when you're ready to stop the weight loss medication. So until next week, remember, The key to making it last is ensuring you're addressing all aspects of whole person health, your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual wellness. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. Share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it, and you are worth it. Happy healthy.